Hey guys, Yamakiller here, back again with another What Decks to Play This Week video. I want to start off the video with a couple things as I usually do. One, if you like my videos or anything I do on this channel, or anything I do on Twitch or anything like that, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, like the video, follow me on Twitch and Twitter in the description below to know when I stream and other things like posting these videos get updated. Second, there are certain formats that I do not play very much, although I do watch coverage, I do talk to people who do play the formats, and I do see what is going on while not necessarily playing them because my time is limited. With those things out of the way, let us get into the video. First, let's talk about Standard. As I've said many times, I'm not the biggest fan of Standard. I don't usually play it unless there's super big events for me to play. Even then, I'm a bit apathetic. But I do like watching big tournaments, and this last weekend there was a big tournament in the Mythic Championship. And these are the decks that I think came out of it pretty well. First, Dimir Rogues, a tempo-y counterspell type deck that tries to use cards like Thieves Guild's Enforcer, Soaring Thought Thief to mill your opponents and get advantage off of cards like Into the Story and Drown in the Loch. Plays a fairly nice game, and even though your opponents have a lot of ways to abuse the fact that you're milling them a lot, it still looked fairly powerful when I saw it being played. So this is one aspect for people who like playing a thinking man's deck per se. This deck definitely falls into that category. Next, Gruul Adventures, another deck that did incredibly well this weekend. Has the Great Henge plus Embercleave, just a way to cheese people on both axes of insane amount of card advantage when you're drawing a lot of creatures, and just, killing them out of nowhere with something like a Kazandu Mammoth, getting a couple landfall triggers, Embercleave over for like 15 points of damage or something like that. So this deck has the ability to go long, has the ability to kill quickly, it has lots of value cards in Bone Crusher Giant, Edgewall Innkeeper, drawing you cards and such. So this is another deck that I would actually probably play myself, as it has pretty straightforward gameplay a lot of the time in the form of Embercleave and the Great Henge. And, you just get to play both aspects. You can play a long game if you want to. You can play a short game if you want to. And you have modal cards like Kazandu Mammoth that help you when you want to hit land drops, when you want to have creatures, and the such. There are other decks you can play like Esper Doom Foretold in a more controlling aspect. You can play Mono Green Food as a way to beat up on Gruul Adventures. But the two decks that I would personally be more looking towards is Gruul Adventures and Dimir Rogues. Now, let us move on to Pioneer, another format I have not been playing that much of, but a deck that I continually do well with when I do play Pioneer. Mono Green Planeswalkers, very straightforward. Don't have to sideboard ever. You have cards like Karn and Vivian Arcbow Ranger that allow you to just use your sideboard completely in games 1, 2, and 3 as wish boards. So it's just a pretty straightforward deck, mulligan to like a Llanowar Elf or something, cast your big green cards. It's pretty straightforward. Some other decks that you can play that have been rising up in popularity: Oops All Spells, pretty good at comboing people out. You've got decks like Burn, which has now been actually taking a more mono-red slant rather than this red-white slant, to play cards like Collective Defiance to cheese out Oops All Spells, making them recycle their hand and draw their deck out. You also have decks like Lotus Combo doing fairly well, getting a top 4 in the Pioneer Showcase. You have decks like Jeskai Luca also doing well in the Pioneer Showcase this past weekend. All these decks I think are pretty reasonable. I think Pioneer is one of the most wide open formats, not necessarily because the format is balanced, but because not many people play it. So I think you can kind of play whatever you want, as people are playing it more casually rather than very competitively. For those reasons, I think Pioneer has the potential to actually be a great format, given some changes and potentially more people working on it. But right now, I've been staying away from Pioneers. There's not really been many big events that I can play, as the challenges and showcases are very early in the morning, or very late for me after I played a lot of Magic already. So personally, I don't really get to play much Pioneer, but when I do, it ranges from absolutely atrocious when I get, Oops All Spells or Lotus comboed, and I don't really get to interact, to some pretty interactive games with Jeskai Luca, Mono Green Planeswalkers, with some Sultai decks. There's a lot of different things you can be doing in Pioneer, and I think it has the actual potential to be a very good format. Now, let us move on to Modern, the format that I've been playing a lot of recently. There's decks like Mono Red Aggro that I think are actually, for the first time in the past couple months, I think is actually fairly poorly positioned right now. Lots of combo decks coming out like Oops All Spells, Ad Nauseam, the white-green Heliod deck, all pretty bad matchups for you. And if you're running into a lot of bad matchups, usually the deck becomes a little bit worse. And I think this is I think this is on the bottom of like the tier 1 decks. I think it has a lot of game against a lot of decks and has a reasonable 4-color control matchup. But a lot of the decks that are coming up from the tier 2 and 3 angle are really hurting mono red aggro right now. So I think I would like to put down this deck personally right now and pick up something like either 4-color control or a deck that I've been playing a lot of recently, Demir Mill. Great combo matchups, great control matchups. The only matchups you're really scared about, mono red aggro and Death Shadow to an extent, and mono red aggro is seeing a large downtick because people are playing decks to combat it, and Death Shadow, while still seeing moderate play, you have good answers to in the form of 8 1-mana removal spells with Blood Juicers and Fatal Push. There are some other variations of Mill that have been coming around with a lot of Drown the Locks and Into the Stories, which I would be tempted to try out. I think are very reasonable as well. Now there's other avenues you can go down. You can go down 4-color control. You can go down this green-white Titan deck that's been doing fairly well. Got first place in the Modern Showcase. I think there's lots of ways for you to play Modern right now, and I think it's more of a matchup roulette format at the moment, where you play Titan, oh, you play against some mid-rangey deck, you crush them. Oh, you're playing Control, you're playing against some combo decks, you're probably going to crush them. Oh, you're playing Combo, you're playing against green-white, or you're playing against mono-red, you're probably going to crush them. Or you're playing against Titan. So it's kind of just like, it's like Titan, Combo, a little bit of aggro and Control, and kind of going on a wheel and, you know, see if you get the good matchups or not. Personally, I'm going to be taking a little bit of break from Modern recently, or over the next couple weeks, but that's mainly because I have a Legacy Showcase event that qualifies me for the MOX if I win, and I need to be practicing for that, and I've gotten a little bit burnt out of Modern as I've been playing it for 20 plus hours every single week for the past couple of months. Let us move on to Legacy. Now, this deck I played yesterday, I played a league with, Is It Delver? It looked pretty reasonable, although the snow matchup looked really medium. And I didn't actually have any ways to deal with the Resolved Chalice in the main deck or in the sideboard currently. So I think I need to make some changes because I'm a little bit worried about that. But this deck looked pretty reasonable to me. Some form of Delver, either Team or Is It, is probably going to be good. You've got Snow Control in some variation, you know, Swords to Plowshares, Oko, Uro, Abrupt Decay. Some variation of this is probably going to be good as well. There's some other decks that you can play. You know, you can play the Epic Storm if you really want to try and cheese your opponents out. I tried to play it 2 weekends ago, did very poorly. I don't think it's quite the deck for me. Play decks like Dredge or Hogak. I think graveyard decks are somewhat well positioned right now against decks like Delver and Snoko. If they don't have the correct cards, they can get overrun fairly quickly. You've also got decks that are very straightforward, like Eldrazi Stompy. That, you know, you get to play Chalice of the Void. You get to play some Eldrazi cards. I'm not sure how good this deck is right now, but, you know, you've got some cheese elements in Chalice on 1, turn 2 TKS, make it hard for your opponent. There are lots of different decks you can play in Legacy that I think are tier 2 that have, like, a reasonable chance of doing well if you find the right matchups. But if I were to play tier 1 decks, Temur Delver or Blue-Red Delver of some sort, Snoko, and I think that's about it for the tier 1 decks. Maybe you can play Depths if people are cheating on some hate for it, but the 2 decks that I'd mainly be interested in, Temur Delver, Snoko. Let us move on to Vintage. Now, we've got a bunch of different things you can do in Vintage. I think it's actually fairly wide open, but there's the 3 major archetypes. There's Bazaar of Baghdad, there's Mishra's Workshop, and there's blue cards. So, you can play your Bazaar of Baghdad deck in the form of Dredge. You can play your Bazaar of Baghdad deck in the form of Vengevine decks. You can play it in the form of just a value card and basically an engine to allow your Hollow Ones, Basking Root Walls, and just play a pile of Force of Wills, Force of Negations, Force of Vigors, and all that stuff. Lots of different ways to play Bazaar. Personally, I would be on Dredge. Lots of people don't have a great Dredge matchup. They're playing like 6 to 8 sideboard cards, but if you fade the sideboard cards or have the answers to them, you usually just get to crush them. Now, the deck personally I'm going to be playing, Grixis Underworld Breach. I've had a lot of fun with this deck in the past, and now that I'm not as concerned about some of the results in some other formats, I can come back to this because I think this deck is very hard to play and is time-consuming if you think about your lines a lot. And because of that, I think I'm going to be coming back to this and even playing a Vintage Prelim with it today and having some fun with it. The deck that I would say some newcomers should go do, Doomsday. I think it's very straightforward nowadays. Doomsday, go get Ancestral Recall, go get Black Lotus, go get Thassa's Oracle, Ancestor yourself, play Black Lotus, play Thassa's Oracle, have Force of Will backup, basically, a lot of the time. So Doomsday is a great new beginner deck, I think. You could play something like Sultai mid-range to beat up on the shops and Bazaar players, while having a slightly less good combo and blue matchup. There's lots of different decks you can play in Vintage. I think it's pretty wide open. There's loads and loads of things you can do to make your blue decks different and how you want to play against different decks, what your sideboard options are, what your main deck options are. I think there's loads of different ways to play both shops with Golos shops and Ravager shops, along with some combo shops decks. I think there's loads of different things you can do in Vintage, and I think they're all pretty fun, and I highly suggest people who have the opportunity to play Vintage to try it out and give it a shot. There's a lot of turn one lose the game, basically, where your opponent like ancestrals and then does some other things, or your opponent, combos you out on turn one. It's not that often. If it does happen, just let it slide, move on to the next one. Lots of long and interactive games, I think, in Vintage right now. Now, finally, Pauper. I'm going to say what I always say. Tron is tier 0. Just play Tron. Don't think of anything else. There's no reason to play anything else. That's just all I have to say about Pauper. I hope that you guys learned a little bit of something in some of these formats. I know I didn't go over as in-depth as I wanted to necessarily in all the formats, but I do like to try and keep the video down below 10 to 15 minutes. If you did learn anything, or you liked the video, or liked anything that I had about these talks about any of these formats, make sure to give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Twitch and Twitter in the description below, and I will see you guys next week on what decks to play. Maybe we'll switch it up to some of the formats. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.